Adele is a young girl from Hungary, working on a not-so-generous salary as a radiologist. Visiting her identical twin in the opening scene, we see just how much the difference is between the two. Eva, the sister, is a rich housewife who is throwing a baby christening party together with her rich friends. The fancy atmosphere, the sight of artificial relationships, fake distinguished conversations, and the rich so-called Jeff Bezos laughs soon become too much for Adele. Here we learn that she was supposed to be the godmother of Eva's son, but this was changed at the last minute. The relationship between the sisters mostly consists of bitterness and complaints. No sign of positive interaction is seen on the horizon. There is no wonder Adele excuses herself to go to the toilet and, instead of entering a bathroom, walks outside towards her car. Speaking of the car, compared to Eva's friends, Jeff Bezos would actually approve of it. Following her throughout her workday in the next scene, we see her on a video call. As it turns out, the HR of a Norwegian clinic is interviewing her, but things don't seem so promising. Her co-workers are quite happy about this. They love Adele. Later that night, Adele is playing an online video game with some kids when Eva gives her a call. As it turns out, she left her bag at her house. The conversation is filled with the underlying unacquaintance of one another, as always. Adele clearly prefers to speak with the teenagers in World of Warcraft. The next morning, she arrives at a construction site on the outskirts of her city to pick up her bag. The owner of the company that works on this site is Eva's husband, so her bag was brought here. Adele meets a young man, Akos, who immediately notices the difference between the sisters. Even though they are identical twins, Adele looks much older than Eva. What a master flirter this young man is. While walking along with him, Adele receives a call from Norway. Fortunately enough, she gets the job, and everyone except her sister congratulates her. Eva is more concerned about the difficult process of renting out Adele's apartment once she's gone. The two are speaking about it when suddenly Adele notices the young man she met at the construction site earlier, sitting among the patients in the hall. As it turns out, he's here to ask her out for a coffee. Unfortunately enough, he chose a bad time. Adele is working, and besides, she's not used to such interactions. Refusing to speak with him at this moment, she enters her room abruptly and finds herself trembling. This is the state in which she answers her sister's call again. This time, Eva's voice seems broken. Being on the verge of crying, she seems to be looking for an unjudging listener, but Adele is in no position to provide her with a compassionate ear. If being anxious and irritated in an empty doctor's office can be considered working, she is drowning in work. The poor man waits for her in the hall throughout the entire day. The next morning, Adele is packing her things when she learns that Akos has asked for her number. The girl is quite happy to hear it. When the packing process is over, Thomas, Eva's husband, helps her take it all to her mother's place. This is where she will live until her departure. The widow named Ildiko is, of course, happy to let her daughter stay for as long as she wants. Eva is here as well in this scene. When the two sisters get in private, Adele asks what she wanted earlier when she called in tears. The way she formulates her question emphasizes her attitude towards this matter. For Eva, it seems as if she doesn't want to listen to her at all. There is a big difference between, "How are you?" and "What did you want?" That night, while playing World of Warcraft as always, she receives a message from Akos and decides to spend the night with him. Throughout the date, we noticed a subtle irregularity in her behavior. She seems to not be so satisfied with her body image. Still, the date turns out well. Through the rest of the night, Adele will play Warcraft with a smile on her face. The next morning, she visits her friend and a co-worker, Vilma, at her apartment. The woman seems to know her very well. When she hears about Eva's call, she says that it's nothing important. Mothers tend to be overwhelmed sometimes. There is a goodbye party planned for Saturday, so in the next scene, Adele puts on her most classy clothes and goes to work like a countess. While thinking of Akos, she seems like another person, more careless and dreamy. Still, however, when the party is thrown at Vilkas, she wears her regular clothes. Eva calls her up and attempts to spark a conversation about that important thing once more, but for the second time, she is rejected by her sister. Adele has to rejoin the party, which she wasn't even invited to. Soon after the call is over, Akos joins the party. Once the introductions are over, he kisses Adele passionately in front of everyone and finds his seat. Everything is just perfect. A tabletop game is introduced, and the duo holds hands, but suddenly, one more person joins the party. Unexpectedly enough, it is Eva, and she's in a great mood. Adele tries her best not to show it, but it all seems as if her paradise has been broken. That night, Akos brings her home in her own car. When discussing their future, they emphasize that they are not in a relationship. Adele points out that she would laugh uncontrollably if Akos ran after her in the airport and begged her to stay. Based on everything we have already seen, we might think that she is actually lying. Perhaps that is exactly what she wants. Exiting the car, she forgets to take its keys. It will have to be returned to her once she sobers up. That night, she dreams of Akos climbing on an enormous crane. He has clearly conquered her mind. The next morning, her sister calls up again to invite her and Akos to her house. As always, Adele maintains a cold tone of voice, but she accepts her invitation only to finish up the conversation as soon as possible. Vilkas approaches her then. She seems really saddened by her future departure. After work, Adele visits Akos at the construction site to return her car keys. An attempt is made to make small talk, but the girl prefers to just embrace him. When the sun comes down, they climb a crane together and look down on the world from up top. Adele seems to fear heights, but this doesn't get in the way of making love that night. Soon the time comes for their visit to Eva's. Adele is a little anxious beforehand, but at first glance, there is little reason for her restlessness. Akos and Tamas feel quite comfortable during the visit, but the same cannot be said for Eva and Adele. Soon the latter finds out what her sister has been calling her about, but she finds that out from Tamas, and not from Eva. As it turns out, the new mother is struggling with postpartum depression, the difficulty that many women face after giving birth. Or at least, this is what Tamas thinks. That night, Adele and Akos slept over at their house. In the middle of the night, Adele goes to the toilet and sees her sister crying in front of the mirror. Her husband is there too, trying to calm her down. Naturally, Adele gets back to bed, but very soon, she feels something on her right hand. Even though they barely even talk, the sisters still seem to have some unexplainable connection. As she gets outside, Adele approaches her sister, who's now alone. For the first time, it feels as if the sisters are about to share something very important with each other. Eva says that it will be difficult for her to express it, but Adele encourages her to speak up as simply as possible. We do not get to hear what Eva says, but clearly, it breaks Adele's whole personality. In the next scene, we see her walking in her underwear on the side of the road in pelting rain. Thankfully, Akos finds her and takes her home. At this point in the movie, our main focus is Eva. Traveling back in time, we arrive at her son's christening. Everybody is waiting for Adele to arrive to be the godmother, but the girl is deliberately ignoring her mother's calls. It is clearly very important for Eva, but unfortunately, Adele only comes to a party that is thrown afterward. She puts his socks inside a pot placed at the entrance and joins the party, as if she didn't just miss the christening. Still, Eva embraces her firmly. It seems very important to her to have Adele's support and friendship at this moment, but as we already know, she won't be getting any from her. Her husband is rich and loving, her friends love her, and her son is as healthy as a horse, but the girl is still struggling to carry some invisible weight. That night, after taking a very long bath, she joins Tamas in bed. Naturally, the man suspects that there's something wrong and that his wife is worried about something. But Eva lies and says that it's nothing important. Taking a 2-hour bath in the hope that your husband is asleep when you join him in bed is, of course, normal. She's having the time of her life and being a mother is great. Her dreams are a little problematic though. There, vines grow out of her, and she forgets that her son's name is Mati. In her dreams, she cries for no apparent reason, but other than that, everything's fine. The next morning, while being on the construction site to drop off Adele's bag, Eva encounters a difficult situation. The battery in her car malfunctions, and Machi is there. Trying to open it, the alarm system goes off, and the kid starts crying. Panicking, the girl runs around the car, trying out the doors, but all her attempts are futile. In the end, she takes out her phone to call Thomas, but fortunately, his help won't be needed. Akos takes the matter into his own hands and breaks the passenger window. Afterward, she has a conversation with Akos in front of a lonely tree that grew out of the chalky ground. The plant is quite unfavorable. It has chosen a hostile, unfit environment for his development. For some reason, Eva feels an unusual connection with this tree. In the next scene, we see Thomas get angry for the first time. The man seems to be quite terrible with that emotion. Losing common sense and the ability to think straight, he drives like a total maniac when his wife fails to behave like a queen in front of some potential investors. They have a kid at home, but Thomas is angry both at the broken window of Adele's car and her inability to act like a classy businessman at a table. If a crash happens, Machi will lose both his parents, but Thomas has already lost the face of a human being. At this moment, he even goes as far as to leave the mother of his son stranded at the side of the road. Left alone in the night, Eva calls her sister for some support, but what she receives, we already know. In a few seconds, Thomas returns, picks her up, and apologizes for his behavior. The stress and anxiety Eva faces every day dry up milk in her breasts. Her life is a mess, but the exquisite, mind-bogglingly expressive watch is still turning in its casing in their house. In the next scene, she wants to talk about the incident on the road with her mother, but again, the conversation is interrupted. Adele's things are brought to their mother's house, and the scene we already saw plays out the second time. Now that we observe their conversation from Eva's perspective, everything seems much heavier. The relationship between the sisters is distant and unhelpful, but the strong underlying connection is still evident. They both hate seeing figures of cats around their mother's apartment. Later that day, she buys some milk from a fellow mom and picks it up at a nearby parking lot. This is when she calls Adele again. The girl is at a party at Velma's, and Eva is disappointed that she wasn't even invited. Bitterness bubbles up inside her heart, and she has to do something about this irresistible feeling. The same scene that we already saw plays out completely differently then. Eva knocks on Velma's door, while having her child pressed against her chest. After catching a glimpse of Akos standing on the balcony, an intense feeling explodes inside her heart. This is why she enters the party without an invitation. The next morning, she spies on Akos from her car. Her motives can only be guessed. Later that day, she listens to a Mongolian battle song in the messy living room of her house, and jumps around in front of the TV like a warrior in violent ecstasy. Clearly, there is a great deal of intense, unexpressed anger in her heart. It is in this state that she invites her sister over with Akos. When Thomas comes home, she tells him about the invitation. Something worth mentioning happens at this moment then. For some reason, Eva lies, and says that she doesn't remember Akos's name. Maybe a feeling is brewing inside her heart. A feeling that mustn't be exposed in front of Thomas. Also, Eva is crouched quite uncomfortably over her kitchen counter throughout this entire scene. Only God knows what that's about. Maybe it's the Mongols. In the following scene, she asks Thomas to replant the tree at their construction site instead of cutting it down, but the husband has no intention of getting in sin with her compassion. He denies this idea coldly. That night, Eva bought binoculars to spy on Akos and Adele the next morning. Seeing the couple climb on the crane seems to hurt her heart, and the bitterness that arises in her mind forces her to continue doing it. That night, she checks if everybody's asleep in the house, and, after getting assured, throws the expensive watch from the window. Her movements are casual. The object that probably costs as much as my left kidney flies away, as if it were the seed of a peach. A message is sent to Adele, and then information is given that the girl will come with Akos. In the next scene, Eva burns her hands while taking food out of the oven. Her behavior here seems deliberate. Instead of Thomas, Akos comes to help her out. As the night moves forward, Eva eats ice cream alone, when suddenly she hears Akos and Adele leaving. Coming outside, she pleads with them to stay over for tonight. Her husband is okay with letting them go, but the way she pleads seems so honest that the guests are inclined to stay. After all, why wouldn't they be in this wonderful house? Thomas is that night. Now we understand why Eva was crying then. As her husband complains about his crane man sleeping in his guest room, Eva sulks in front of him. Curses are thrown, and work comes spitting out of the man's mouth. His actions seem despicable and unmanly as he drags Eva to the window to make her see the state in which she's at the moment. The girl doesn't resist. She cries and says nothing. The self-obsessed man behind him continues his ranting, and once he's done, Eva helps herself get rid of all the ice cream she ate a few minutes ago. When she's done, something unexpected happens. Akos comes into the bathroom. He thinks the girl is crying for Adele, but unexpectedly, Eva dashes forward and seeks comfort in his arms. The man doesn't resist. The night is hardly endurable for the girl. Laying in her bed beside her husband, Eva listens to the couple in the guest room as they are having the night of their lives. Soon, she hears their door opening and in one abrupt motion, stands up too. She needs to talk with Adele immediately. Catching her in the hallway, she chooses not to beat around the bush. She just cannot stand the fact that Akos and Adele are together, and she expresses this quite straightforwardly. She is in love with Akos, and there is nothing she can do to get rid of this feeling. Adele simply says, "Okay." Exiting through the front door, she gets out into the pelting rain. The next morning at the airport, a huge, violent silence is rooted between the two sisters. They might never see each other again in years, so this is not a way to say goodbye. Eva is the first to realize this. Acknowledging the fact that she needs to hug her sister before her departure, she asks her for permission for an embrace. But after what happened last night, Adele thinks that it wouldn't be fair. Coldly, she denies her invitation and watches as Eva gets overtaken by a sudden panic attack. Suffocating in front of her, the girl crouches down, but Adele chooses not to dash forward to help. In the end, it is their mother who runs for aid, but Eva needs a hug from someone else. Suddenly, she stands up straight again and, in a blink of an eye, runs away as fast as possible. At this moment, something clicks in Adele's mind too. Running after her, she catches up and falls right into her arms. The two sisters embrace one another firmly and experience something totally magical. In this moment, the two individuals become one entity. Vines grow out of nowhere and bind them together as two completely different people experience an unearthly unity. No matter the differences, they love each other, and this kind of love is the most unexplainable and unique. With the help of Akos, the tree at the construction site is replanted at the most unexpected location. It is Tamas's house, over his most fussed over and tender carpet.